This episode of Mode Push, we review the Singapore GP where Dan Jimenez, our own Dan Jimenez, was live today to take in the sights and sounds of an amazing race and an amazing finish and a winner in Checo Perez. He almost didn't get the win even after all was said and done, but sure enough, he gets the W. We're going to recap the whole thing, the experiences from the sights and sounds to the food and the what you shouldn't do when you go to an F1 race. It's all coming up right now on Mode Push.
Radio check. Loud and clear.
KSL Sports and KSL Podcast present Mode Push, an American view of F1, starting now.
Don't stop. He's making cut with his honestly.
I'm gutted. I'm absolutely gutted.
I enjoyed this so much. Thank you. Thank you.
It's going to be maximum points for Sergio Perez, who on the streets of Singapore wins the 2022 Singapore Grand Prix. This, the greatest race for Sergio Perez.
Vamos, Checo. Unbelievable. What a drive.
This is how we do it, man. We shut our mouth and we work hard. This is the Mexican way.
You heard it right there. It's the Mexican way. The winner of the Singapore Grand Prix for this year, of course, Checo Perez. Sergio Perez flying on that first lap, immediately taking the lead and then never relinquishing, even after an investigation post-race. Welcome to Mode Push. Alex Kirry here in Salt Lake City. Our own Dan Jimenez on the ground in Singapore. Hasn't even left yet, and this is the exciting part for us to be able to have him there. And Dan, we'll just jump right to you. It was your first race. I mean, I'm going to relinquish basically the floor to you. I feel like today because this was an amazing opportunity for you to go over there and watch it, and certainly it was not without drama. Because an investigation after the race put Sergio Perez with a 5-second time penalty, and that still gave him the win. It was enough to be able to fend off Charles Leclerc for the win there. Max Verstappen finishing 7th. He'll have to, boo-hoo, wait another week for a championship. That's good for us, though. We didn't have it wrapped up after this race. How was the whole trip, man?
Oh, man, what an experience. Drama's the right word from, the race, the whole weekend, all 3 days. I mean, what a race, what a racetrack, what a city, just an incredible experience, lived up to and surpassed all my expectations. It was awesome to come out here and see the race, and Singapore was a great host, just so many fans. I think they said it was a record-breaking crowd, folks from all over the world, just a super diverse crowd. And and the racing wasn't half bad either.
So with the rain and with everything, everybody was on inters basically the entire weekend, it seemed like, and so that green tire proves to be kind of a weird thing. And then suddenly, halfway through the race, everybody starts saying, "Hey, man, I'm diving in, I'm grabbing the slicks," and then it was a race to try to see who could stay on those slicks, and eventually everybody kind of stayed on those, and Max Verstappen was kind of interesting in the race because he ends up 7th, and it was just an up-and-down thing for him. But people sliding everywhere. You had, I think, 6 DNFs, guys just going off the track, crashing into one another, engine problems for, Fernando Alonso and his 350th Grand Prix. That's a pretty cool thing to be around for the old man's 350th Grand Prix as well. So yeah. In the end, what was the vibe there at the place in terms of like what everybody thought about where the finishing podium was? You had Ferrari at a 2-3. You have Sergio at the top there. But this is kind of an interesting weekend too because you had an excellent weekend, maybe their best weekend from McLaren all season long, and they take the lead in the Constructors' Championship from Alpine. But you had a good weekend from even the not just those guys from Alpine, but also the oh my heavens, your guys, the green team, the double points,
right, yeah,
green
Aston.
team, Aston Martin, Lance Stroll had his best finish of the year. I think he finished 6th, and so there were all sorts of things in this race that made it a lot different than maybe a regular weekend, and at least we had some racing to talk about.
Yeah, the vibe in the paddock in the stands was, tons of fandom and support for the 3 that you would expect with Mercedes, Red Bull, and Ferrari, and then a lot of McLaren. fans out there, just a ton of, the papaya orange, which I thought was interesting. And then it kind of drops off a cliff from there in terms of, you don't see as much Aston Martin support or Alpine. I can't even think I saw an Alpine shirt the entire weekend on any fans, which I thought was interesting. But the vibe in the stands was a lot of people pulling for Charles and, wanting to see him get that win. And the Max fans, who were pretty loud at the start of the race, quickly, I think, turned their support over to Checo when they realized it was out of reach for Max. And so, it was just a great race from the stands because, like you said, lots of drama with people running out on the wet. Before the race, we were all sitting around talking and thinking, man, wouldn't it be great if it just absolutely dumped right before the race, but then it stopped raining, so we wouldn't have to sit in the rain, but we still got a wet race. And the sky opened up about an hour before the scheduled start time, and monsoon level torrential downpour, and then as quick as it came, it went away, and so we got our wish, which created a very dramatic race.
Part of the dramatics too were, I think we're watching this whole thing, and anytime you have conditions change like that, pace kind of doesn't really matter. But we're able to get through the weekend. Kind of I guess I don't know. After that little break, you kind of just hope that the gap shortens between Max Verstappen and Red Bull and Ferrari. Was there an idea, and that maybe Mercedes finds something too, right? And so you don't really get a sense after a really wet race, and when you see just conditions kind of all over the place. So, what was the vibe on the pace of these cars? Like, had somebody figured some things out in some of these dry sessions? Did we see who, or are we just really not going to know maybe until another dry race in a couple of weeks?
Yeah, I don't think we got a really good read of where everyone is shaking out after the 2-week break. So we might have to wait to Suzuka. Obviously, Red Bull didn't really show a ton of pace during practice, but I think that they were just kind of going through the regular playbook, and then we're going to bust it all out during qualifying. And Max was up on Charles for the pole there, and then the controversy of him getting called into the pits on his last lap, which I was sitting in that last corner during qualifying. And we had heard over the loudspeakers that Max was, purple or just, on track for his pole lap. And then he dives into the pits, and we were all just confused. Like, what was that about? And it turns out he didn't have enough fuel in tank to be able to provide the required fuel sample. And so he had to get pulled in, or else he would have started dead last.
So the rest of us at home had to hear the radio message, which was quite colorful. If you're listening, I always love, it's funny because people were pointing out Yuki Tsunoda drops 100 F-bombs in a session, and people are like, that kid needs to settle down. Max Verstappen doesn't. You go, wow, what a competitor.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. That was a great audio clip.
As you start to look at some of these finishes here, and we kind of set up for the rest of the season, I think this is great for racing. I think it's great that Sergio, anytime he gets a win, it feels like something personal. I would imagine everyone would be like this. Every racer would be like this. But, he's looked at definitely as that number two guy. I mean, everybody is number two to Max Verstappen. And so why wouldn't you be? And Sergio Perez to have a win like this, I mean, that's as good as it gets. I mean, this guy, it seems like all the top racers in this series, all the F1 drivers who are at the top in that top tier, and I wouldn't put Checo necessarily in that top tier of racers, but he is exceptional in the wet. And there are a handful of guys who are like that. And so when you see a guy like him win, and you see him hold on to that entire thing, and luckily he had a 7.5 second pad before they levied that 5 second. Penalty against him. And I didn't really get it because they're like, oh, he was getting way too close to the safety car. And I'm thinking, I thought that, I mean, it seemed like, everybody complains about how slow the safety car goes. Lewis Hamilton was an expert at living next to Burt Mylander in that freaking safety car. So I don't know what the regulation really is and why they had to talk to him. They actually reprimanded him once and then gave him the 5 second penalty as well.
Yeah, from my understanding, the rule was that the leader has to stay within 10 car lengths of the pace of the safety car. And I think what happened was there were 3 times that he was actually outside of that. So I think it was more that he wasn't keeping close enough rather than getting too close. And they gave him a warning the first time, and then then he had two individual kind of moments or during two of the corners, I think around lap 35 or 36. So if you were to add all those up, you're like, oh, he should be at least a 10 or 15-second penalty, and that would have handed the win over. But I felt like that the 5-second penalty was probably appropriate for the severity of the infraction, which is really not, I don't think, a very big deal. I don't think it's a safety issue or a competitive advantage issue. But going back to Checo's performance, I'm with you. Like, every time he wins, and this is his fourth win now. The common saying is like, this is the biggest win of his career, and I really do think that applies in this case. Obviously, Monaco was a big win because of the venue, but he had to do it here in Singapore in the wet and the dry through qualifying and the race, and his skill was just on display. He got an amazing start, was able to get to first by the first corner, and then Charles was pushing hard and keeping the pressure on him, and made multiple attacks where he was getting right on his gearbox, and he held strong and honestly didn't put a tire wrong the entire race. And then when they knew that then the investigation was coming, and they gave Checo the heads up that he needed to stretch that lead out, it was just like a light switch turned on, and Charles couldn't do anything about it. And all of a sudden, Checo was 7.5 seconds up the road. So yeah, he I think has put I think with this win any doubt to the side of his belonging there in that second spot at Red Bull. So I'm really happy for him, and it was a popular win at the track. Everyone was excited for Checo. He's just so likable.
Yeah, I think when you see anybody at the top of the podium that you don't necessarily anticipate before a race that would be there, and to have to bust your butt that much to be able to get there too, I think he was beyond, driver of the day, in the voting when it came through, on the TV side. You're like, well, of course, this guy, just from start to finish. I mean, it's hard to have a start to finish, when Ferrari's breathing down your neck, and arguably one of the best drivers in the world is right behind you the whole time, then that, makes a difference. And so I think a lot of folks look at what happened today and they go, great, for two reasons. I look at it and I go, good. For as much as I think Max Verstappen is beyond deserving of the world championship this year, the sport doesn't need this thing to end with 6 races left or whatever it is. It's no good for this thing to end without a little bit of drama. And so when I'm watching this thing too, Dan, I'm looking at it from the TV perspective. I was try to take in the scenery around, and I'm definitely like, there were maybe 10 times where I paused and tried to look and see where you were on the track. And I'm like, okay, there's a grandstand shot. And they have the most random shots up there of people who are up there who don't even know they're on, TV, and they're barely paying attention. And I go, just put it on Dan for 2 seconds and let's get his tired mug as they're going through this thing. You must have been.
You would have seen me. You would have seen me just poured in sweat. There is no place on earth I've been that compares in humidity levels to Singapore. And I've spent some time in some pretty humid places, but it's another level here on the equator in Southeast Asia. And yeah, if the camera had caught me, it wouldn't have been a pretty sight.
It's like the worst wet T-shirt contest on the planet with all these guys who are out there sweating their butts off. But I'm also trying to take in what the environment looks like. And I think that Singapore, Abu Dhabi's a lot like this. These night races, they do so much to make it look really, really compelling. And I feel like that there is something that for some reason, it feels like this track, they bust everything out. Like even to where on the finish where they have that giant TV that the winner parks on, that has it's like that angled, giant television that has a screen underneath the car and on top of it has the winner on there. I'm like, oh, that's fantastic. Plus the fireworks that go around the edge, into turn one and through that thing. And the fireworks, I think, went off for maybe 30 minutes. It seemed like, too, just kept going. So in terms of an environment, and the assault on the senses. Like, are you wearing ear protection, or are you, how is it that it's actually like taken in from there, and how much can you actually like follow the race? Because it's one thing for me to watch it on TV and to see all those angles. Are you guys watching a big TV during the whole thing? And is it the same type of a consumption of this thing where you see all the lap times, and do they do a pretty good job of making sure you guys are up on the entire race, even though you're at one corner of a big track?
Yeah, so I was sitting in turn one, kind of that turn 1 and 2 area. And so we had a television directly across the track from us. And so that has the live feed from, F1 TV. And then over the loudspeakers, they have like a live track set of commentators. So it's not Crofty and everybody on Sky Sports, but it's a local set of announcers. And so, yeah, you get a pretty good sense of what's going on in the race. You can see it. Obviously the running order and the replays, but you don't get a lot of the radio chatter. Like when the radio chatter comes on over the loudspeakers, like you can't hear it. It just, it's kind of too loud there in the stands. So there's a little bit of detail that you miss that if you're watching from home, people are getting, but all in all, I think that the track and then the city itself does just such an incredible job of putting this event on. And I kept thinking through the weekend, man, Las Vegas has a lot to learn to be able, and Miami too, but I'm thinking more specifically Las Vegas, to be able to match an experience like this. The city goes all out. There's, tons of support from the government. Not only are streets closed, but like you said, there's just events and attractions all over the track and around the city. To make it an experience. And like I was thinking, even when the rain was coming, I was like, yeah, it'd be a bummer if the race rained out, kind of like in Spa last year. But honestly, there's so much going on around this city that I wouldn't get bored. From the light shows, I felt like there's a drone light show going on every time I looked up into the sky. And like you said, the fireworks. It was a visual spectacle unlike anything I've ever seen.
Maybe we'll convert in Utah to the drone fireworks in the future, so we don't have to have the discussion about fires, going on here in the West. But I'm watching this whole thing, and I'm kind of looking at it through the lens of knowing you're there, knowing that that this race is got a lot on the line because everybody's waiting to see if Max Verstappen was going to be crowned the champion. Everything was, every headline today is Max Verstappen doesn't finish on the podium, can't wrap up world championship. And I'm like, everybody, you don't want him to wrap up this championship. Do we remember last year that the entire championship came down to a half a lap, essentially, in the final race of the year? You're not going to get that every year. But this is the thing that I think that F1 and some of these that you look at and you go, man, that's a real bummer when you see races where they're, the winner is in front by 72 seconds. And in a day like today, when you have the conditions like they are, to be able to have a race that has a little bit more mixed results, I think is fantastic for the sport. So here's what the points look like. And I'll ask you a question about Sir Lewis Hamilton here in just a second. So in the points, Pierre Gasly at 10, Lewis Hamilton at 9, Sebastian Vettel, nice showing by him. He got past on that last lap and a half there too. And Max Verstappen was just like on a tour of trying to like just take everybody out, it seemed like. So and then Max Verstappen was 6 points in 7th place there. Lance Stroll 6. Daniel Ricciardo and Lando Norris, a very quiet 5 and 4. Like it was interesting because you didn't hear that much about these guys, even though you said McLaren had a ton of support there. They finished with double points and double figure points as well. They finished with 22 as a team and probably their best weekend. And I thought it was really nice for Danny Rick to have the weekend he did. And then, of course, the podium, Sainz, Leclerc, and Perez at the top of that thing. So out of everything, what was a storyline maybe that you looked at and you said, people aren't talking about this enough, or kind of where things are in the championship versus what we're seeing? Because it seems like Red Bull, you knew they were probably going to win the Constructors, but this really kind of puts a chokehold on Ferrari even when Max Verstappen isn't winning, Sergio Perez is.
Yeah, I think that what we saw this weekend is that Max Verstappen is indeed human, and he makes mistakes like other drivers, but very rarely. When he tried to make that pass after the safety car restart, and everyone had gone over onto the slick tires, he, like you said, he was pushing hard for every single pass, was being really aggressive. and then on that restart just stepped out of the dry line and tried to make the dive bomb work on the wet, and it immediately just was a bad idea. I kind of saw it coming as soon as he popped out. I'm like, this is not going to work. And yeah, sure enough, he blew through the corner into the runoff area. I think we saw Lewis do something similar too earlier in the race. And so, yeah, the two world champions getting caught out by trying to be a bit too aggressive on slicks in the wet.
George Russell did the same thing, and that's a guy who had a really poor showing today. Like, he could have taken advantage of the fact that to finish 2 laps down and in dead last of the finishers was about as bad as it gets for a guy like George, who usually doesn't have a day like that in the rain.
Yeah, he had to start from the pit lane because he took a new power unit. And then I think he was the first car to go to slicks. I think that was probably a move by Mercedes to experiment. They're like, well, he's already out of the points as is. Let's experiment and see if he can pick up an advantage, and then we'll have Lewis change over. But yeah, not a great running by George for someone who's been so consistent all year.
When you look at the driver standings for the championship, you still have Max Verstappen's clear of Charles Leclerc by 104 points. Sergio Perez pulled within 2 points of Charles. I think Checo, I don't see him finishing second in this thing, but I think that if there's a guy, if Sergio Perez is able to nip Charles Leclerc in these last few races and take that second position, that might be one of the better storylines of the year, because it's like, Max Verstappen is the best driver. And I couldn't imagine Red Bull not wanting to extend that guy even further, because I think his contract goes through next season. But, you think about all the shifts and the ups and downs. He's a perfect mix. Checo is of a team player, but also he has just enough edge to be kind of pissed, he's getting shorted. Like, I'm also probably going to be the world champ at any moment here, guys. Don't you? And I know he believes it. Every one of these freaking guys, you can't be in a racing seat in F1 without thinking that. But the egos on these dudes is so massive. But Sergio also has a really, really good PR team. His family must just be able to be like, hey man, here's how we play this thing. We go in there. No one expects us to perform this way, because everybody's talking about Ferrari and Charles and Carlos, and you forget about Checo sometimes.
Yeah, he's that perfect balance, like you said, of playing the support role and helping his teammate out, like he did in Abu Dhabi last year with giving Lewis Hamilton a heck of a time during that race to help out Max. But then, like you said, as soon as he can smell the lead, he doesn't back down and is able to win when Max isn't having a day. So if you're Christian Horner, I have to think that you love that mix. You love the personality that he brings to the team, and just, I guess, hope that he doesn't maybe get a little bit too competitive with Max. We'll see. I would love to see it. And Red Bull would love to have not only the Constructors Championship, but the 1-2 finish on the drivers, and just really kind of put this thing to bed. But I'm with you. I think Charles will continue to fight. I think that's a matter of pride at this point that they have to finish second this year.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a couple questions to round this thing out here, since you're now our most experienced traveling reporter out there in the field. So, best meal that you ate in Singapore, and thing that you would go, okay, I'm going to do that differently next time I go to a race.
Oh, that is a good question. I think the best meal was some dim sum that we had in kind of one of the local markets here.
Is this the one that the robot? Is this the one that the robot brings to you? Is that
the
what
robot?
It is?
Yes. So a robot seated us, took us to our table, and then it's like a dim sum factory. There was, I lost count, but 20, 30 people in the kitchen there just making dumplings. And it's probably one of the best meals that I've ever had. And we ordered way too many different types of dumplings, and they just kept bringing the stacks of those little kind of wooden platters out, and it was excellent. Yeah,
what's
so that was the best meal for
what's
sure.
the name of this place then, so we can throw it out there? It's a Michelin star.
Din Tai Fung, something like that. I can put it. We can either put it in the show notes, or I can put it out on Twitter. But yeah, Din Tai Fung, I think, and it's actually a bit of a kind of a chain out here. There's multiple locations.
Oh wow, that's you don't see that a lot.
Yeah, it was excellent. That was the best meal.
I'm trying to find it. You know what's terrible is I'm looking at this. I was like, how hard would it be to find Michelin-starred dim sum restaurants in Singapore? There's 10 of them. There's all these Michelin-starred dim sum restaurants just in Singapore, and I'm going, I thought maybe we'd be able to find this thing easily. Well, the good news about dim sum and Michelin stars is it's super, super cheap. You get that food really, really inexpensive, I'm assuming, right?
No, this one actually is. This is why we picked it. Is it's one of the few
that's
actually
awesome.
Like you can get a meal for $10.
No way.
So, yeah,
a Michelin-starred restaurant for $10 in Singapore.
Yeah, and there's one here in the airport we haven't had time to go to, but there is a ramen place that has a Michelin star here in the airport as well.
I feel like the airport is just as cool as any other place you can visit in Singapore.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's pretty incredible, and just not just like visually and just like the attractions, the waterfalls, the rainforest, and all that stuff. But like the way that they run customs and security is smoother than anywhere I've seen.
What's the worst part about this trip? Like where you go, oh man, I could have missed that. Like, or the part that you go, that's a hassle of trying to go to an F1 race.
Well, I would say the worst part of this trip was the heat and the humidity, for sure. So if I could do it all over again, VIP passes to the paddock maybe would have been nice, but we're probably a ways away from being able to do that in the future. But as far as traveling to an F1 race, I mean, this is a really far race to get to. I think that you could have similar experiences, Canada, Austin. I know Miami and Las Vegas are relatively new, so they're probably still getting their whole fan experience dialed in. But I think that F1 tourism is, maybe the future strategy for me, and we'll see how many times we can do a race before my wife catches on that we're exclusively going on vacations where there happens to be a race going on that weekend.
Okay, so how many days was this then? This is like a 12-day adventure then, wasn't it?
I last had boots on the ground in the U.S. 17 days ago. So my wife, we'll see if she talks to me when I get home.
I haven't done that long of a trip, but it is tough because the nature of my job is the same way. When you get back and you try to claim how tired you are, it's a bad move because you're like, oh yeah, you're super tired from watching a bunch of sports. That's basically what I get when I come home from a trip like this.
I expect zero sympathy, and I probably have some fractured relationships after this with how long we were gone. So will be some work for you to get home.
So now that you're the experienced guy, we'll have to take all the things we learned into Las Vegas next year then. I think it's almost a foregone conclusion that we have to figure that race out next year in America.
I'm down. I'm totally down for that.
All right. Well, so you don't hate it yet. That's what's good. You haven't said I'm not going to do this for a while, because there's some trips that I do to some of these long, faraway games, some of these like bucket list type things where you go, I don't know if I'm going to do that again. But it takes a few months, and then you go, no, I'll go do it again. All right. So from the constructors standing, you have the drivers, like we said, who are it's 1, 2, 3 right now. Max in the lead, far out and away. Checo's in third, and then you have Charles, of course, right there, sandwiched between the guys, trying to run down any semblance of some championship points, and a miracle, obviously, for him to be able to figure that one out again. So when you think about schedules, you're going to be out. I'm looking at the schedule here for the next few races that we have, and the stuff we're going to be able to come up with here. But you had, of course, this weekend, and then you're going to have next weekend in Japan at Yakuza. I almost called it Yakuza.
Suzuka.
At Suzuka. Yakuza would be the one you don't want to visit. If someone invites you to a race at Yakuza, you're going to be murdered in Japan. and then the race after, and then 2 weeks after that, we'll have our U.S. Grand Prix in the latter part of October. So, Dan, I hope you had a fun time, man, and we'll let you loose here so you can get on your plane and then make your way here stateside, and then we'll chat again later in the week.
Yeah. Thanks so much. I'm looking forward to doing a more in-depth recap of just the whole fan experience. There's just so many, really interesting details about what we saw here that I think that would be interesting to listeners, as well as kind of help prep anyone who's going to be going to a race in the future. So I'm excited to do a deeper recap.
All right, for Dan, I'm Alex. We appreciate you guys joining us here. If you know anybody who loves F1 or is getting into it, tune them onto the podcast. Let's get this thing going. And let's make sure that they know that there is an American podcast here that talks about F1, and they even have such a huge budget to be able to send one of their hosts to Singapore. All right, for Dan Jimenez, Alex Kirry, for KSL Sports and KSL Podcast, we'll catch you next time on Mud Push, everybody.